I still remember the exact moment I realized something wasn't right. Nobody said anything directly. There was no confrontation, no awkward conversation where someone pulled me aside and told me the truth. It was nothing that obvious, and somehow that made it worse. It was subtler than that. A slight step back during a conversation that should have been comfortable. A shift in posture, almost imperceptible, the kind of movement people make without realizing they're making it. A pause that lasted just a beat longer than it needed to. A hand that moved briefly toward a face. Small things, individually easy to dismiss, collectively impossible to ignore once you start connecting them. And when you start connecting them, when your brain begins assembling those scattered moments into a pattern, something shifts inside you. A quiet discomfort that doesn't have a name at first. A low-level alertness that follows you from one conversation to the next. A question that never quite resolves itself, no matter how many times you brush your teeth or reach for a mint. There's a particular kind of insecurity that doesn't show up in the mirror. It's not about how you look. It's not about your clothes, your hair, the way you carry yourself in a room. It's about something invisible, something you cannot see, cannot fully confirm, and cannot easily fix. Something powerful enough to create distance between you and every person around you, not through any dramatic event, but through the slow, quiet accumulation of doubt. The constant, low-grade fear that your breath might be pushing people away. And the thing that makes it so uniquely exhausting, the thing that separates this from almost any other self-conscious worry, is the uncertainty. You can look in the mirror and know whether you like what you see, but you cannot smell your own breath the way others do. You can't confirm or deny. You're always working from incomplete information, reading social cues that were never designed to communicate this, trying to solve a problem you can't fully observe. That uncertainty becomes a companion, a quiet one, but constant. It follows you into meetings, into first dates, into conversations with people you want to impress, people you want to connect with, people you care about. You start monitoring your own behavior in ways you never used to. You choose your distance in conversations more carefully. You speak less than you want to, hold back moments that should have been spontaneous, turn your face at angles that feel protective even when you can't explain why. And without ever making a conscious decision, that small, invisible doubt starts shaping the way you move through the world. Your confidence, your presence, over time, even the way you see yourself. This is what nobody talks about when they talk about bad breath. They talk about it like it's a minor inconvenience, something solved by a better toothpaste or a stronger mouthwash. But for the people living with it persistently, without answers, without resolution despite everything they've tried, it isn't minor at all. It is a daily tax on confidence, a daily erosion of the ease that should come naturally in human connection. And if you felt any version of what I just described, stay with me. Because what I'm about to share goes much deeper than anything you've been told before, and I think by the end of this, something is going to click for you that hasn't clicked before. As I move deeper into understanding this problem, not just as a surface-level hygiene issue, but as a biological, psychological, and social phenomenon, I began to see something that changed the entire frame. Bad breath, in most persistent cases, is not primarily a cleanliness problem. It is a signal, a message from the body that something in the internal environment is out of balance, not a catastrophic imbalance necessarily, not something that will show up on a blood test or send you to a hospital, but a functional imbalance, the kind that accumulates quietly over months and years, and expresses itself through symptoms that most people try to manage rather than understand. The problem with managing symptoms is that the underlying signal keeps transmitting. You mask it temporarily. You suppress the odor for a few hours. You feel okay during the window when the mint is working or the mouthwash is fresh. And then the problem returns, not because you failed, not because you used the wrong brand or didn't try hard enough, but because you were addressing the output of a process while leaving the process itself completely undisturbed. I've met many people in this situation, people who are genuinely diligent about their health. People who research their options, invest in quality products, follow advice carefully, and yet the cycle continues. Try a solution, get temporary relief, watch it return, feel the frustration, try something else. Repeat, endlessly. What breaks the cycle isn't trying harder with the same approach. It's understanding the approach was always aimed at the wrong target. So I started treating this like an investigation, not accepting the conventional explanation that bad breath is simply a consequence of poor hygiene solved by better hygiene. That explanation doesn't hold up when you look at the actual evidence, when you talk to people who are meticulous about oral care and still struggle, when you look at what the science actually says about the microbiology of the mouth, the role of the gut-oral axis, the systemic factors that influence breath quality in ways that no toothbrush can address. I looked at patterns. I looked at daily habits, not just oral hygiene habits, but everything. sleep quality, hydration, diet composition, meal timing, stress levels, breathing patterns, gut health, the way certain medications alter oral chemistry, the way certain lifestyle patterns create a chronic low saliva, high bacterial activity environment that reasserts itself every single night while you sleep, regardless of how well you brushed before bed, and a picture began to emerge. Bad breath that persists despite good hygiene almost always follows a pattern. It has consistent underlying drivers, and those drivers, once identified, can be systematically addressed. But here's what I found most striking. The vast majority of people dealing with this, even those who have been dealing with it for years, have never had the underlying pattern explained to them. They've been given product recommendations. They've been told to brush more thoroughly, floss more consistently, use this rinse or that spray. They've been given tools without being given understanding. And understanding is what actually changes things. Let me walk you through what that pattern actually looks like. It starts in the mouth, specifically in the relationship between saliva, bacteria, and the tissues of the gum and tongue. Your mouth hosts somewhere between 500 and 700 bacterial species. This isn't a hygiene failure. This is biology. The mouth is one of the most bacterially diverse environments in the human body, and this diversity, when balanced, is essential to oral function and health. The problem begins when that balance tips, when the beneficial bacterial strains that maintain equilibrium, that regulate pH, compete with harmful species, and support tissue integrity, are diminished, while the anaerobic strains associated with odor and inflammation are allowed to proliferate. This happens through a combination of factors that almost nobody addresses together. Chronic mouth breathing that reduces oxygen and dries the oral tissues, high sugar and refined carbohydrate intake that feeds harmful bacterial populations, inadequate hydration that reduces salivary flow, chronic stress that suppresses the local immune response in gingival tissue, and the paradox of aggressive antibacterial treatment that destroys the beneficial microbiome while resistant harmful strains recover first. These anaerobic bacteria, the ones that thrive in low oxygen environments, particularly in the spaces below the gum line and in the deep grooves of the tongue, break down proteins and amino acids through a process called proteolysis. And as a byproduct of this breakdown, they release volatile sulfur compounds, hydrogen sulfide, methyl mercaptan, dimethyl sulfide. These are the same compounds responsible for the smell of rotting organic matter in nature. And they are being produced continuously in varying concentrations depending on the state of your oral ecosystem inside your mouth. No amount of masking changes the production rate. Only addressing the microbial environment does. Before I go further, I want to mention something briefly and then we'll keep going. Everything I'm describing here, the pattern, the underlying drivers, and specifically the structured approach to addressing them systematically, is laid out in detail in a guide we've linked in the description below and in the pinned comment. It's not a product ad. It's not a sales page disguised as information. It's a practical, organized resource for people who are serious about finally understanding what's actually happening and taking a structured approach to fixing it. I'd encourage you to grab it before you finish watching. Click the first link in the description or check the pinned comment below. You'll want it alongside everything I'm about to share. Now, let's keep going. There are several physical signals that, when you know how to read them, tell you clearly that the underlying pattern I've been describing is active in your body. The first is the morning mouth experience. Before you brush your teeth tomorrow morning, before you drink anything, before you do a single thing to intervene in the natural overnight state of your oral environment, pause for 30 seconds and pay attention. Swallow once, deliberately. Notice the taste. Notice the texture of the saliva. Notice whether there is a coating on your tongue that has a quality of thickness or bitterness or metallic weight to it. Notice whether the sensation in your mouth feels like a clean overnight rest or like something has been actively happening in there. That is a readout, a real-time indicator of the bacterial activity level in your oral ecosystem over the previous 8 hours while your saliva production was reduced and the anaerobic bacteria were in their most active period. Mild and quickly resolved after brushing, your ecosystem is relatively balanced. Significant, unpleasant, and a version of what returns throughout the day, you're looking at an imbalance that runs deeper than surface cleaning can reach. The second signal is gum behavior during brushing. Healthy gum tissue, maintained in a low inflammation state with a balanced bacterial environment, does not bleed from normal toothbrush contact. If you see blood on your bristles or when you spit, even occasionally, even lightly, this is inflammation. Not aggressive brushing, not sensitive gums in some generic sense. Active immune response to bacterial presence at and below the gum line. Most people see this and either brush more gently or ignore it. What they don't realize is that it's among the clearest signals available to them that the underlying bacterial imbalance has progressed to the point of affecting tissue integrity, and that bad breath and gum inflammation are very frequently two expressions of the exact same root problem. The third signal is the afternoon return. You brush thoroughly in the morning, maybe you use mouthwash, you feel clean, and then within a few hours, often before lunch, sometimes well before, the sensation returns, the thickness, the taste, the awareness that begins to track back into your consciousness and restart the background monitoring that exhausts you so thoroughly. This is the clearest evidence that the source isn't being reached, because if brushing resolved the cause, the effect would stay resolved for far longer. The rapid return tells you that the bacteria responsible are in locations that aren't affected by brushing, primarily below the gum line, in periodontal pockets, in the deep fissures of the tongue's posterior surface. These areas require a different approach. Not more of the same, applied harder. Now I want to talk about some of the less obvious drivers that almost never come up in conventional oral health conversations because they are some of the most important ones. Gut health and the oral-gut axis. This connection is far more significant than most people are aware of. The digestive system and the oral cavity are not separate systems that happen to exist in the same body. They are continuous. The same microbial imbalances that manifest in the gut often express themselves in the mouth as well. Research into the gut microbiome has expanded dramatically over the last decade, and one of its consistent findings is that microbial dysbiosis, imbalance between beneficial and harmful bacterial populations, doesn't stay localized. It communicates upstream and downstream. Certain gut conditions, particularly those involving inadequate stomach acid, slow gastric emptying, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, are associated with characteristic breath patterns that originate not in the mouth at all, but in the digestive tract. If your bad breath has a component that emerges even with a clean mouth, particularly after meals or in the morning before eating, gut health is likely a factor in your personal pattern, nasal and sinus health. The oral and nasal cavities share more than physical space. They share microbial populations, inflammatory pathways, and drainage systems. Chronic low-grade sinus inflammation, the kind that doesn't produce obvious symptoms but maintains a continuous drip of postnasal secretions, feeds the bacterial populations at the back of the throat and tongue that contribute significantly to breath quality. Many people who struggle with persistent breath issues also have a history of sinus congestion that they have accepted as simply part of how they are. The connection is not coincidental. Breathing patterns, mouth breathing, whether during sleep, during exercise, or as a habitual resting pattern, is one of the most underappreciated drivers of chronic oral imbalance. The mouth is not designed to be the primary breathing airway. Nasal breathing filters, humidifies, and oxygenates air in ways that mouth breathing does not. When you breathe primarily through your mouth, particularly during the 6 to 8 hours of sleep, you are creating ideal conditions for anaerobic bacterial proliferation. Reduced oxygen, reduced saliva, dried oral tissues, and a disrupted pH balance. Many people who make even a partial shift toward nasal breathing, particularly during sleep, through practices or positioning changes that encourage it, report noticeable improvements in morning breath quality within weeks, not because they changed anything about their oral hygiene routine, because they changed the environment. Hydration timing. It's not enough to drink adequate water throughout the day, in some general sense. The timing of hydration matters specifically in the context of oral health. Saliva production is most critical in the early morning hours, when it needs to counteract the overnight bacterial activity. Starting the day with water, before coffee, before food, before anything that would further reduce or acidify saliva, creates a different starting condition for the day's oral environment. It flushes the accumulated overnight bacterial byproducts. It dilutes the concentration of volatile sulfur compounds. It begins to reactivate the salivary flow that is your primary biological defense. This is such a simple intervention that most people dismiss it. But the mechanism is real, the effect is measurable, and for many people, it's one of the fastest acting changes they can make. Let me stop here for a moment, because if what I'm describing is resonating, if you're reading your own experience somewhere in these patterns, then I need you to understand something. This isn't information you have to piece together alone across dozens of articles and conflicting advice and products that promise more than they deliver. We've done the work of putting it together in one place. In the first link in the description, and in the pinned comment below this video, there's a complete practical guide that walks through the specific steps of the structured approach I've been building toward in everything I've shared here. The exact habits, the specific sequence, the supporting factors that determine whether this works quickly or slowly, the things most people miss even when they're trying hard. Seriously, if you haven't clicked it yet, do it now. Open it in another tab while you keep watching, because by the time we reach the end of this video, you're going to want to have it in front of you. The link is in the description. It's in the pinned comment. It takes 10 seconds to find. And what's inside it could change the next several months of your life. Okay, let's keep going. I want to talk about the psychological dimension of this more directly now. Because everything I've described so far has been biological. Microbiomes, volatile sulfur compounds, salivary flow, gum inflammation, all real, all important. But the experience of living with this isn't primarily biological, it's psychological, and that dimension deserves to be taken seriously on its own terms. There is a cognitive load that comes with persistent, unresolved bad breath that most people outside of the experience completely underestimate. It is the constant monitoring, the background process running in your mind during every social interaction, consuming attention and energy that should be available for the actual content of your life. Think about what that actually costs. In a meeting, instead of being fully present for the ideas being discussed, a portion of your cognitive bandwidth is running a parallel process. How close am I standing to this person? Has my breath been okay today? Did I eat something that might have made it worse? Should I speak up right now or wait and speak from a slightly greater distance? On a date, instead of being genuinely curious about the person across from you, instead of being relaxed and spontaneous and fully there, you're managing, calculating, maintaining a careful distance that you hope reads as composed rather than avoidant. In a casual conversation with a friend you've known for years, someone who knows you, someone you shouldn't have to perform for, that same background process is still running, still consuming, still shaping your behavior in ways too subtle to name but too constant to escape. Over time, this vigilance changes you, not in a way that's obvious to observe from the outside, but in a way you feel from the inside. A slight constriction, a habitual holding back that becomes indistinguishable from your personality. A version of yourself that is always slightly more guarded, slightly less spontaneous, slightly less free than the version that existed before this problem took hold. And the cruelest part is that most people experiencing this don't recognize it as a consequence of the breath issue. They've absorbed it so thoroughly that it just feels like who they are now. Slightly cautious, not quite as expansive, quieter in rooms where they used to be louder. It doesn't have to be. That version of yourself, the less monitored, less guarded, more spontaneous one, isn't gone. It's just waiting for the background process to stop running, waiting for the problem to actually be resolved rather than temporarily managed. And resolution is possible, real, lasting resolution, not through trying harder at the same things, through understanding the actual system and addressing it at the level where the problem originates. Let me walk you through the framework that emerges from everything I've described, the four-part approach that, when applied consistently and in the right sequence, actually addresses the underlying drivers rather than just the surface expression. The first element is environmental restoration. Before you can add anything beneficial to your oral ecosystem, you have to stop adding things that disrupt it. This means reconsidering the role of strong antibacterial rinses used daily, particularly alcohol-based formulas, which research consistently shows alter the oral microbiome in ways that ultimately favor the resilient, harmful strains over the beneficial ones. It means looking at diet not just in terms of sugar content, but in terms of which bacterial populations specific foods are feeding. It means addressing hydration seriously, not as a general wellness platitude, but as a direct intervention in salivary volume and composition. The second element is mechanical disruption, done correctly. Brushing and flossing matter, but technique matters more than most people realize. Brushing at the wrong angle with too much pressure in the wrong pattern. These things can damage gum tissue, create microscopic trauma that makes bacterial invasion easier, and still fail to reach the critical zone at the gum margin where biofilm accumulates most aggressively, the 45-degree angle toward the gum line. Gentle circular movement rather than aggressive horizontal scrubbing. Flossing in a C shape around each tooth, sliding gently below the gum margin rather than snapping between teeth. These technical details make the difference between mechanical disruption that works and mechanical disruption that misses the target entirely. The third element is microbiome restoration. This is the component most people have never been offered. The oral microbiome can be actively supported, not just through eliminating what doesn't belong, but through introducing what does. Probiotic strains specifically studied for their effects on the oral environment, including Lactobacillus reuteri, Lactobacillus salivarius, and Streptococcus salivarius K12, all of which have published research behind their effects on periodontal health and breath odor, work by competing with harmful anaerobic strains for resources and physical space. They don't eliminate all bacteria. They shift the balance. They are the beneficial species that a healthy oral ecosystem is supposed to have in abundance, and that modern antibacterial habits, processed diets, and chronic stress have steadily depleted. The delivery method matters. Swallowing a probiotic capsule designed for the gut delivers minimal benefit to the oral environment because the organisms spend almost no time in the mouth. Oral-specific probiotic lozenges or chewables, allowed to dissolve slowly and distribute throughout the mouth before swallowing, make physical contact with the tissues that need to be repopulated. This is the difference between a systemic supplement and a targeted local intervention. The fourth element is systemic support. The oral environment doesn't exist independently of the rest of your body. Vitamin C is critical for gum tissue collagen synthesis. Deficiency states are directly associated with increased gum fragility and bleeding. Vitamin D has documented effects on the immune response in oral tissues. Zinc inhibits the growth of odor-producing bacteria and plays a role in VSC metabolism. Magnesium, CoQ10, and omega-3 fatty acids all have research connecting them to oral inflammation levels. These aren't replacements for the local interventions. They're the systemic foundation that makes local interventions more effective. A garden that is systemically nutritionally depleted will struggle to sustain what you're trying to grow in it, even with perfect surface care. I want to take a moment to talk about the connection between oral health and broader systemic health, because I think most people genuinely have no idea how significant this is, and it changes the stakes of this conversation considerably. The mouth is the beginning of everything, literally and biologically. Everything that enters your body enters through your mouth. Every microorganism, every food compound, every environmental exposure that reaches your digestive, immune, and respiratory systems passes through the oral environment first. The quality of that gateway, the bacterial composition, the tissue integrity, the inflammatory state, influences what gets through and in what condition. Research over the last 2 decades has progressively strengthened the evidence for what's called the oral systemic connection. The findings are striking. Periodontal disease, chronic gum inflammation with established bacterial involvement, has been associated in large population studies with increased risk of cardiovascular disease. The proposed mechanisms involve both direct bacterial entry into the bloodstream through compromised gum tissue and the systemic inflammatory burden of chronic oral inflammation. The same bacterial species most associated with advanced gum disease, particularly Porphyromonas gingivalis, have been identified in atherosclerotic plaques in arterial walls far from the mouth. They have been found in synovial fluid of arthritic joints. Research groups studying Alzheimer's disease have found oral bacterial DNA in brain tissue samples. The connections are still being mechanistically established. This is active research, not settled conclusion, but the directionality of the evidence is consistent. Oral inflammation is also directly associated with dysregulation of blood sugar metabolism. Multiple studies have found bidirectional relationships between periodontal disease and type 2 diabetes. Each makes the other worse. Treating gum disease in diabetic patients has produced measurable improvements in glycemic control in controlled studies. The mouth is not a cosmetic concern, it is a systemic health gateway, and the state of the oral ecosystem, the bacterial balance, the tissue integrity, the inflammatory load, has consequences that extend through the entire body in ways that medicine is only beginning to fully map. Taking this seriously isn't vanity, it is foundational health maintenance. And doing it for the first time, actually addressing the root causes rather than managing the symptoms, is one of the highest leverage health investments most people never make. I need to be completely direct with you right now. Everything I've shared in this video, the microbiology, the pattern recognition, the 4-element framework, the systemic connections, it represents years of investigation synthesized into something coherent and actionable. And I genuinely want you to act on it, not because I need you to, because you've been dealing with this long enough, because the version of you that isn't spending cognitive energy on this every day, that isn't monitoring every conversation, that isn't holding back in moments that should be spontaneous, that version is accessible. It's real, it's not a fantasy, but only if you actually do something different from what you've been doing. The guide in the first link in the description and in the pinned comment at the top of the comment section right now takes everything we've covered here and makes it specific and actionable. It tells you exactly how to implement the environmental restoration phase. It tells you exactly what to look for in an oral probiotic formulation. Not just a generic probiotic, but the specific strains with published research behind their effects on the oral environment. It covers the mechanical technique corrections that most people have never been shown. It addresses the systemic support layer. It puts everything in a sequence that makes sense physiologically. It is the map, not a vague set of suggestions, not another list of products to try, a structured path built on the biological understanding of what's actually happening and what specifically interrupts it. If you've made it to this point in the video, you already have the context that most people never get. You understand why nothing else has fully worked. You understand what the actual target is. You understand the full scope of what's at stake, not just your breath, but your gum tissue, your systemic inflammatory burden, your long-term health. Don't let that understanding sit without action. Click the first link in the description right now, or scroll to the pinned comment at the top of the comment section. It takes literally 10 seconds to find. Because the gap between knowing and doing, that gap is where this problem lives, where it has always lived. And the people who close that gap are the ones who stop having this conversation with themselves every single day. You deserve to be one of those people. The link is there. It's waiting. And so is a version of yourself that moves through every room, every conversation, every close moment, completely free. Subscribe to this channel and stay on this journey with me, because what we covered today is one layer of a much larger and more consequential investigation. In the next video, I'm going to show you something that may completely reframe the way you think about aging, about what's inevitable and what isn't, about what your body is telling you that you've been misreading, and about the hidden connections between systems that most conventional health frameworks treat as completely separate. What's happening in your mouth today is connected to things that will matter in your body years from now. And understanding that connection fully, not in a frightening way, but in an empowering way, is where this channel is going. Stay with me. The most important parts are ahead.